Hey guys, welcome to Star Wars Timeline. Today we have a really special and awesome podcast for you guys. So, we have my friend Jon, who I've met through my Facebook group. Jon, please introduce yourself. Tell our fans what you're all about. What are your hobbies? What are your things that you do?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. First of all, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity. Relatively new to the Star Wars kind of fandom. I've been a fan my whole life, but really starting to interact through the pandemic when everything has gone a little bit more digital. I'm really enjoying your Facebook group specifically and a couple others. I'm Jon. Again, I'm a customizer.
Thank
We're
you.
here to talk about some. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We're here to talk about some of the figures that I've made and just really kind of dig into that hobby.
Yeah, let's hit right into it because, as we talk, some of the fans will understand that both of us are not purely Star Wars fans. We obviously enjoy other things, but I want to hit off with the first.
Batman.
There we go. Yeah, that's the Catwoman from the second Tim Burton Batman
Right.
film, correct? I
Yeah,
recognize it right
absolutely.
away. Oh,
Returns.
yeah, man. I want to hit off with the first general question, and we kind of like built our conversation into Star Wars and beyond. Um, Tell the audience, please, what was the first exposure to Star Wars?
Oh man. So to the movies, my first exposure, I don't know how old I was. It's one of my first memories, honestly.
Mhm.
I'm at the bottom end of a lot of siblings. I'm at the young end, and my older brothers and cousins loved Star Wars. So I grew up playing with their, dirty, grubby paint chip toys and vehicles. And funny, Leia's my favorite character. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But when I was little, I never had a Leia toy because they never had one.
Mhm.
And when I was born in the 80s, playing with their toys from the 70s, so I would use any female action figure I could find to stand in for Leia, even if it was a 11-inch Barbie doll with my 3-inch figures.
Right.
So that was kind of my introduction to customizing, was trying to find a toy that could work as Leia before I even knew that customizing was a whole hobby. But
Mhm.
my introduction to the films, I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and I'd been playing with the toys, but I'd never seen the movies. I think my mom thought maybe they would be too scary. And I was having a sleepover at my uncle's, who later through our relationship would kind of come to be known as the uncle that let us watch R-rated movies. And we watched the first Star Wars movie, and he was like my rich uncle too. So he had this huge TV and surround sound, and I'll never forget Darth Vader's breathing and the sounds of the lightsabers, igniting coming from behind me, and
Yeah.
the chills that it put up my spine. I've been a lifelong fan ever since.
That's awesome, man. It's funny how both of us, like you and I, were from basically the same generation. I'm also an 80s kid.
Okay.
I was born in 81, but back then I was back in Russia. I moved here when I was 14.
Oh,
And it
well.
was pretty much the same experience. My pops brought the original trilogy on VHS. It's like, hey guys, I got something special for you. We saw it, life was never the same again. But I came through it directly through films because toys were something that were not very popular, at least in my small town. I don't know how it was like in Moscow, the central areas, but in my
Sure.
small town, we didn't have access to any kind of like books or comics or stuff like this. It was just the movies that we saw. And for many, many years, that was our little universe. Only when I came here, I started to go, oh, what is this? They got comics, they got action figures. Oh, they got the whole
Right.
Star Wars culture here.
That's awesome.
That's how I started learning. So if you could like point out, I know you already mentioned a couple of things which are very dear and near to you, but if you can like pinpoint one happiest memory associated with watching Star Wars, what would it be?
Oh man. So I mean, it's really like permeates my entire life. It's been my favorite movies, my favorite toys, as long as I can remember. But if I had to pick just one, I remember when I'm going to be fuzzy on the dates, but when the original trilogy was remastered and released in theaters, the way
Mhm.
that they staggered the releases, I was able to see all three of the original trilogy movies for my birthday in the theater.
Nice.
So that was a great memory. And then with the prequel trilogy, I'm a twin brother. I have a twin, and my brothers and I are twins, and of course, the same friends, all in the same age group. And we would skip school every year to see the releases of the original trilogy movies in the theater. We were right old enough that we had our driver's licenses and could skip and go see them. So those are probably my tied for my favorite memories for
That
sure.
is really, really awesome. It really like closes the circle, and regardless like what culture you come from, what language you speak, we all speak that same language, right? Of art and music, and
Right.
film and cinema, popular culture and stuff like that. So it really brings us all together. It's one common language that we can all speak. And you already mentioned that Leia being your favorite character, so I suspect probably your most impactful scene revolves around her, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
What was it?
Oh, this is probably going to be like a controversial opinion, maybe, but my favorite scene, maybe not my all-time favorite scene, but when you say the most impactful, was the scene in The Last Jedi when the ship explodes and she's floating in space, and
Hmm.
it's so short or so quick after Carrie Fisher had passed away, and
Right, right.
there's this kind of cathartic moment where Leia's floating in space and you think that she's passed, and then her hand twitches and she pulls herself back to the ship. And I know a lot of people laugh at it, and it did look maybe a little silly in the abstract, but
Hmm.
like in the head and in the heart of someone who is still grieving the loss of Carrie Fisher and who's been growing up with Leia as an icon, that was such a moment that just like I'm getting kind of teary eyed just thinking about it. And it also
Yeah.
confirmed her as a force user, which it had, I guess, been confirmed maybe through the scene in The Empire Strikes Back, and when
Hmm.
she remembers her mother in Return of the Jedi. But just actually seeing her use the force was really special, especially considering the surrounding circumstances. So that has to take the cake.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning controversy because, this is one channel that I try to introduce a type of conversation, especially in my podcast, a long form conversation where we sit down and we talk, and fans from all corners of fandom come in, and we don't necessarily have to always agree, but we can
Sure.
arrive at some common denominators and say, hey, we like this, we dislike this, but it's all
Yeah,
Star Wars to us. And I
I
don't
love
think
that.
it takes a special or unique kind of perspective to understand that sequels are flawed. Movies, they're not ideal.
Sure.
But, just like you, I also found quite a few special moments in it. And especially after Carrie Fisher has passed. Generally celebrity men and women, passing away doesn't generally impact me. But for some reason,
Sure.
hers really, really, really hit hard. I'm like, oh man, it's part of my life is like forever gone. I also like teared up, it was also like really emotional. And for
Right.
me, also with Leia, one of the most impactful scenes is in episode 9 when she was able to kind of like reach out to Ben when he's healed and her body is passing, into the next life,
Yeah.
and he's reborn. I'm like, what a magnificent scene. Like, criticize the rest of the film all you want, but that's a really beautiful scene right there.
I agree with you. I think that when you say criticize the film, it's my least favorite of the. I don't hate the movie by any means, but it's my least favorite of the
Hmm.
new trilogy, and certainly not the way that I probably would have chosen to end it. And that's what you say where sequels are flawed because we all have in our head what we want them to be, and it rarely becomes that.
Yeah.
But the idea of Carrie Fisher having just been such an accessible celebrity to everybody, and when you said that she really kind of touched her passing touched you more than you expected, I think
Hmm.
it speaks to the content of her character, and that just came through in every single movie, and especially in episode 9, which was remarkable because it was footage that was put together after her passing, which I think speaks to what you're saying is that she was so open and
Hmm.
so genuine in the character of Leia that even the cut footage that they cobbled the story together with became the most touching part of that entire movie. It's pretty incredible to me.
Yeah, I gotta speak to the artistry of the film as well. Again, flawed or not, I think it was their best interest, their best intention to make a good film. It's everybody's intent,
Yeah,
but sometimes you just simply fail. The
right.
greatest directors in Hollywood have failed before. But I gotta, credit them for taking that unused footage and using like all the mileage out of it and really making something meaningful around it and writing the character around it.
Right.
So
Yeah, the
okay.
emotional impact was incredible.
Right, right. And this is the reason I wanted to for us to start conversating about Star Wars in general, to bring into this conversation when we start talking about figurines, why does it matter to us so much? Why we care? We're not just here to show off little pieces like, hey, look what I made. We want to bring our personality into it, why it matters to us. And it's like you and I, we have interacted a little bit on Facebook group, but we barely know each other as people.
Right.
And I'm already beginning to finding something out about you. And I think that's what it's all about. It's about fans coming together and saying what we enjoy about Star Wars. It's not spending the rest of the day pinpointing every single detail that didn't work for some reason.
Oh,
You
sure.
know?
Nothing's perfect, and if you perseverate on the things that you don't like, you lose the whole point of being a fan.
Yeah. Let's jump right into it. The figurines and model making, and please do
All right.
correct me if I get a lot of terminology wrong. I'm
No
not
worries.
right. So the first question I have for you: what is your earliest memory of playing with action figures in general?
in general. So I was a big Ninja Turtle fan when I was a little kid, and also He-Man. Those were like my two. I was right in the age group for those. I was in like kindergarten, first grade, second grade when those toys were like the toys. So and it really all circles back to Star Wars for me, because when I said I was like on the quest to find a female stand-in figure for Princess Leia, and that was not easy to do at the time, especially female figures were almost non-existent. So I
Mhm.
do have memories of He-Man, specifically the action figure of Teela and She-Ra, and then the other one was April O'Neil from the Ninja Turtles. Those were my favorite. And I was actually my other biggest like love of a fandom is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So a lot of the figures that I make are actually reusing parts from Buffy the Vampire Slayer figures that I had when I was a little kid, because they're in the right scale and they're beautifully sculpted. So I would use my April O'Neil reporter figure as a stand-in for Buffy, because they didn't have those toys when I was little either, from the
Yeah,
movie of Buffy, which actually I'll show you here quickly.
go
This
for
is
it, man.
one of the first customs I ever made, was like a movie version
How old were you?
of Buffy. I was probably like 10 or 11 maybe
Oh
when I
man,
made
this is
this.
awesome.
12 somewhere. I was a teenager or
Yeah.
young child. Yeah, that was my
Can you
first.
rotate her? I want to see the backside as
Yeah,
well.
for sure.
Oh, this is cool, man.
Thanks. It's posed like on the movie poster.
Yeah, I imagine you didn't like have to paint or anything. Just the pieces, the parts came in that color.
No, it's all painted. Yeah,
Oh,
it's
it
all
was
originally.
painted.
Yeah, I painted it all. Yeah, with like
Nice.
craft paint. Yeah,
Hmm.
I've upgraded the supplies a little bit now, but at the time it was nothing was sculpted. I believe. I think I sculpted her hair at the time, maybe, but everything
Hmm.
else is just kind of cobbled together and then painted for accuracy.
Yeah. When I was a kid, the earliest memory I remember with playing with toy soldiers is my father was huge on buying Christmas gift. And we usually
Nice.
Russian kids, they give the gifts on New Year's Eve on
Oh, okay.
December 31st into January 1. That's
Oh,
because
cool.
for us, New Year and putting a Christmas tree is not a religious holiday. It's more of like a pagan kind of like
Like a
calendar holiday.
celebration
Yeah,
of.
for
Okay.
everyone. Yeah, because like
Cool.
I'm Jewish. I had like Christian friends over here. We all celebrated New Year's and we all got gifts on the same day. And one day, my father like whips out this, the box of action figures, and unlike posable figures like toy soldiers and GI Joes, they were just a cast mold figures about this size, about 3 centimeters, 3.5 high, of cowboys and Native Americans.
Nice.
We called them back in the day cowboys and Indians. And
Yep. Same.
and because there is a culture in Eastern European and in Russia growing up with westerns made in Europe. And it was a
Okay.
legendary filmmaker and actor, Gojko Mitic, who was a Serbian actor and stuntman and choreographer. He did like a whole bunch of things. And those movies about Native Americans were vastly different from the Western films, from American films,
Okay.
where they
That are
actually
like cowboy and Indian movies.
exactly. They kind of like celebrated the culture and showed you the
Oh,
music
cool.
and the dancing. So a whole different focus, in storytelling. And for
Very
us,
cool.
we always saw like the Native Americans, the heroes of our playing experience, and the cowboys were
Nice.
like these macho guys, like cool guys with the guns and stuff, and also cool looking. But the biggest misfortune was they were not posable. I was like,
Right.
oh man, come on. And only then, with like in mid and early 90s, when they started introducing GI Joes,
Yep.
my mind just exploded. Like, oh my god, you can move them now.
It's exactly what you've been waiting for, right?
Exactly.
That's a good little kid moment.
That's the magic of it. Now, do you remember when you were a kid, and you started getting your first presents and toys? Was the person who was gifting you things, was there ever a distinction between collecting things or just no? You could go ahead and play with them.
It was pretty much always play with. I had one cousin who I'm still close with. He was older than me. I was in high school. I'm sorry, he was in high school when I was probably in elementary school. Um, and he collected toys. He was the only adult that I knew that collected toys. He had lots of Star Trek toys. And there was a Star Trek toy that I wanted and I could never find at the store. And I was at I think it was a graduation party at his house, and he said, "Hey, come
Mhm.
here and look at my collection." And he pulled this bin out from under his bed, and I was a little kid. He saw my eyes light up, and it was the one toy that I've been looking for. And he said, "I'll give it to you, but only if you promise not to open it, because this is going to be worth something someday." And I kept it for like 2 or 3 years and never opened it and never opened it. And finally one day my mom was like, "Oh, just open it," and ripped the package open. So I was happy she like ripped the band-aid off for me so I could play with it. And I think you can get the toy on eBay now for like probably $2 or $3. It turned out not to be
Yeah.
not to be the collectible he thought it would be.
So it was the right call to actually opening it and enjoying the thing,
Yes,
right?
exactly, to play with it.
See, with us, like my dad, he like insisted on like disciplining us and like you could have your toys that you play with. And then he had his whole collection of toy model cars made out of
Oh,
metal
okay.
with opening, doors and everything. And I couldn't take it. Every time he's not home, he's more like, I gotta pop the box really gently so it doesn't break. When he's not watching, I gotta play with this thing. And then he had these like really larger toy soldiers. They're based from like the Russian Revolution, the ones that stormed the Winter Palace, like kind of those
Okay.
guys. And then the Hussars, during Napoleonic Wars, kind of like those historically like interesting. And then also a Native American guy. I specifically remember this dude. He had like this feathers and like 2 tomahawks. They were so beautiful and like proportional and well built. And he's positioning them there on the shelves. He's like, guys, those are not for playing. You can only look at them. I'm like, that's the biggest torture for a kid. I just wanted to compare notes here and, to wonder if you had a similar kind of experience.
As an adult that collects toys, and I don't have any children, but I have lots of nieces and nephews, and so I'm in my office right now, my at-home office, and it's filled with toys. There's cabinets on every wall. It's Batman, Star Wars over here is like toys I've had since childhood, some political things, and concert memorabilia. So I have baskets in every room of my house that have toys that kids can play with. There's a basket in my office, a basket in my living room, a basket even in the bathroom of like bathtub toys that kids can play with, because I don't want to be the monster that has like a toy museum that kids can only look at. So every time I order Princess Leia on eBay and it comes with an R2D2 and a Chewbacca, they go into one of the bins, and so my nieces love to come over and play with them.
Yeah, you probably could see the on the side over here, my like gaming collection over here, like PlayStations and Switch and all that. So I'm a huge gamer. I almost kind of like observe it in my peers and friends my age and even younger guys. It's as adults, we always try to replenish that kind of need, that urge, something that was missing in our childhood.
Oh, for sure.
Dude, if your Nintendo was missing, or if your Sega Genesis broke when you were a kid, that's a heartbreak. Like as an adult, you always try to fulfill that little fantasy.
For sure.
Right?
For sure. I lost my Tila action figure from He-Man when I was really little. And it was after they stopped making them, and it was before eBay and the internet even. And to this day, like I moved into this house about a year ago, and as a housewarming present, my mom bought me one on eBay. Like it was always the toy that got away. And I finally got to replace it.
That's awesome, man. So let's get into it. Tell us how you got interested in modeling your action figures.
So it started really early. I've always been like an entertainment junkie. I love movies and music and television and comic books and just anything that I can digest from a creative perspective. And I would always see a movie. My family would go to the movies every Friday night. My mom worked at a group home with men who had Down syndrome, and the great part of it was that she could go and pick them up, and then she would come and pick us up, and we would go to have dinner at Burger King, and we would go and see a movie every single Friday night. And it was just a little dollar theater, small town. So the only movies they were ever showing were like the big blockbusters, and I would see it as a little kid and just get wrapped up in the magic of it, no matter what movie it was, Twister and anything like that. And I would come home and think, man, I wish that they made toys for that movie, because I've always loved action figures.
Okay.
So then I started with repainting. I would just find a figure that looked like the character as close as it could, and then I would paint their clothes to look like what they looked like in the the movie that I wished that there were toys for. And I liked Barbie dolls when I was little too, because my degree is in fashion design and merchandising, and that started when I was really little. I like to make clothes, so somewhere in that, painting my action figures and making clothes, making doll clothes out of fabric, really combined into like what I do today, which is a combination of sculpting, mixing and matching of parts and pieces from other figures, and then making soft goods clothes to kind of have that original throwback to the Star Wars toys that always had, the soft good element. I try to incorporate at least one soft good element in almost all of my Star Wars customs where it's applicable. I'm not going to force it in, but try to find an opportunity in almost every piece.
I'll never forget one of my cousins. She moved from the hometown when I was born. We moved first into a different part of southern Russia, and then her family followed a couple of years later. And we were very close, so we were missing each other a lot.
Sure.
And when she came, the first thing that she showed us is her father just bought her this Japanese doll.
Oh, wow.
Beautiful, like beautifully tailored kind of like outfit, like one of these like official, Japanese for collecting purposes. Right. And he gave it to his daughter as a Barbie doll to play. Guess who were the guys who wanted to play with her? Like me and my brothers are like, can we take a look? This is too cool, right?
Yeah, it's cool.
I don't think when you're 7 or 8 year old, like you don't pay too much mind to what parents are saying, and the
No,
whole
you don't
gender
care.
role and that kind of like education that kicks in a little bit later. You want to
Sure.
experiment, you want to play around, you want to take a look at
Yeah,
things.
you find what you like, and you don't care if it's in the boy aisle or the girl aisle.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
remember the earliest memory of trying to modify or do something with figurines. My father used to work in the souvenir fabric, and we had a pretty popular Chinese Netsuke artist come in. You know, the Netsuke, the small little figurines they have that thematically portray different Chinese folklore, like
Oh, okay.
a boy on a bull or a sitting Buddha.
Okay.
And the figurines are about this size. They're generally made in ivory. They're called the
Okay.
Netsuke in
Oh,
Japan. I
cool.
think that's the Japanese name, if I'm not
I've never heard that before.
right. So, and my father was the one who kind of like cast and molded them for mass production. So he brought a couple of few of them home, and the only thing I could do with them because they were already cast in solid, kind of like material that replicates ivory. And all I could do is look at them and say, "Oh, I like this little Buddha." And my father goes like, "Here's some paint, do something."
All right.
He was
Cool.
always he was like artistically inclined but self-taught, but he always pushed me in that direction, like, "Hey,
Oh,
let
that's
me
cool.
just trick this kid into trying to do something creative." So that was my experience.
Nice.
John, uh, what are some of the major influences or maybe mentors who helped you develop your skills as years passed by?
So I've got a couple answers to that, depending on, I guess, what perspective you're meaning. But creatively, or just speaking in broad artistic spectrum of terms, both of my grandparents,
Mm,
I was never fortunate enough to really know my dad's dad. He passed away when I was, I think, about 2 years old.
mhm,
But his legacy, of course, lived on, and he was an incredible oil painter and a leather worker. My dad's brother, who is my godfather, he's my dad's youngest brother. He is like just breathtakingly talented with wood. The things that he makes out of wood,
mhm.
just with a knife in his hands and wood, you would think that somebody like sculpted them out of like clay, or that they're porcelain when you look
Oh
at them,
wow.
because they're so delicate. They're incredible. My dad's an amazing woodworker, more in the line of like carpentry. He makes boats, duck decoys, hand carved. You
Hmm.
can wood burn a piece of wood to make it look like a real feather. It's incredible. And my mom's dad is just and we were very close. He passed when I was 16, so I had a
Hmm.
long time to get to know him. And he was an incredible artist. He could draw, and he would sit and draw with me. And never like drawing lessons, but if I would say to him, it's Halloween time, Grandpa, draw a witch. He
Right.
would say, "Here, sit on my lap, and we're going to draw a triangle for the hat and a circle for the face." And he would kind of walk me through the steps. And it really, at a very young age, made me realize that I was like a little bit better than all my peers at drawing, and that it was something that if I maybe fostered, that it could become a real, real gift or a real talent, which it has. And from a figure perspective, I started making figures. I mentioned about painting them and things like that,
Hmm.
but I realized when I was probably in high school, I would say, that it was something that could actually be like a hobby, and maybe even, for some lucky people, a career. I was at the store with my sister, and I always like to go and look at the toy aisle. I still do. Every store I go into, Target, whatever, I'm looking at the toys before I leave. And I said, "Let's go look at the toys." And she's like, "Man, you really like toys." And I was like, "Yeah, my dream would be like to be able to make them." And she's like, "Oh,
Hmm.
that's unique. You don't hear about that when people are talking about,
Hmm.
career options. That's cool." And then maybe a week or two later, I get a box in the mail from my sister with a note that says, "Follow your dreams." And it had these two like superhero blanks, for lack of a better word. They were about the size of a GI Joe, and there was a male and a female, like generic superhero, and they were
Hmm.
just completely blank stance, blank face, all white. And it said, "Follow your dreams, like start here by creating your own superheroes." And ever since then, I'm like, the world is your playground when you can take these things apart and put them back together and add and subtract and make them literally whatever you want. The only limit is your imagination. And it's just been since then just a growing hobby for me that has actually very recently become a Star Wars hobby. And I don't know why it never
Hmm.
really dawned on me. I wasn't a big Black Series collector. I never had the room for it. They're huge
Hmm.
figures. I don't like to work in the 3 3/4 scale just because it's so small. You get a headache by the time you're done trying to work at that scale. Very recently, within the last, I'd say, 2 years, I started working in the Black Series scale for Star Wars, and it's just been nonstop since then.
Hmm. First of all, awesome story. It looks like
Thank
basically
you.
art lives in your family for a very, very long time. And
Absolutely.
it's pretty much the story is in my direct family because from my mother's side and my father's side too, my mom finished fashion school in Russia.
Oh, cool.
So she still likes sewing and putting things together of that nature. But it's really, really cool when you have that relationship with your elders, perhaps parents or older cousins, who kind of open you up to things and get you excited not directly in a way of teaching, but like direct example. You see them do it and you're like, oh, this is so cool.
Yep.
That's the best way, because like you're tricked into it, and there's almost a sense of ownership that, hey, like I started it, I'm doing it. And of course, as you grow older and your perception changes and you kind of understand that everything comes from someplace else, you begin to appreciate it even more.
Absolutely. You just always know that it's a possibility when there's art around you.
Yeah.
It's not just something in a museum.
Yeah.
But when you go into your grandma's house and say, I love your painting, and she says, oh, thanks, your grandpa made it. We picked the flowers together and
Mhm.
I arranged it and he painted it. It just makes it so grounded and real
Yeah.
that you're like, oh, I could do that. You know, it's not
Yeah.
like you see a master in a museum and think it's not for you. It's for somebody that's really special to go in a museum. When you
Mhm.
see oil paintings on your parents' office wall that your grandpa did, it's a really cool open door into the world of art.
Mhm. I worked here in New York City. We had a store in Northern Bronx on the 231st Street and Broadway called Games and Comics for over 13 years. It was just me and my boss, this Korean gentleman, Henry, and he oversaw the store. He didn't know a thing about the things he was selling: video games, comic books, figurines. I was the guy who brought in the crowd. There was a high school nearby, kids of all ethnicities: Hispanic kids, white kid, Russian kids, Serbian, Greek, you name it.
That's
Everybody
cool.
came. Yeah. And I really started getting curious and asking the question of how the things are made when we started getting these collections of Todd McFarlane figures.
Oh yeah, that
I
was
would
a
have
game changer for
clients,
me too.
right? Like I would have clients come in and show us in the catalog that they used to have for comic books, so what's coming in 3 or 4 months in advance. It's like, hey, Henry, I'm putting dibs on this. I need this collection. I need this collection. Here's the money up front. And they would
Right.
come in or send the wife in 2 or 3 years after, 2 or 3 months after, and pick up the entire collection. And one of them was the Todd McFarlane Zodiac series, where he would take each sign of the Zodiac and put a
Mhm.
twist on it. And it just blew my mind how next to like Japanese and like play arts and different figurines, which are very, very expensive, like 6-inch and 12-inch, you would
Mhm.
have McFarlane figures, which are like 7 or 8 inches tall, immensely detailed and painted. And I'm like, how the heck this is going for $14.99 or
Yeah, it was
$16.99?
incredible.
So I'm leading into this question. You, as a person who creates these things, can you walk us through the process of how you create your figures and give them that final finish that looks really awesome? Because, dude, when I saw your Luke and Leia from the original Star Wars poster that you recreated, I couldn't believe the amount of details you put into it. I'm like, how is this
Thank
made?
you. Yeah, so it's a huge process. It depends on the size of the project, I guess, to start.
Mhm.
If it's something that I'm very comfortable with, like I'll show you an example. So this is something that
Please.
just kind of like sometimes I'll just be watching Netflix and I have like ADD, so I need to always be working with my hands to be able
Mhm.
to focus on anything. I'm like the adult that has fidget toys in their backpack, and
Yeah.
um, I will if I'm watching, even if it's a movie that I love, I need to be engaged in something else. So
Mhm.
um, an example, if I'm just like watching movies, a figure like this is like Lieutenant Connix. She was played by Carrie Fisher's daughter,
Yeah.
Billy Lord. Character that I thought was really cool. How I had heard like later in Carrie Fisher's life that she didn't go anywhere without her daughter, and that she was,
Mm.
you see her on the red carpet with her, and
Mhm.
you hear about her how she just had this anxiety and the stage fright, and then you see her daughter in this movie with her, and I thought that was kind of cool that she took her comfort and her security literally into the film with her,
Right.
and but they never made a figure of it. So the reason I use that as an example of like a small scale project is it's just something that popped into my mind. I keep like some organized drawers of like legs and hands and arms and
Right.
heads and even some soft goods, and I would just open it up and see like, okay, well, I can use this head and these legs and this arm. There's not any sculpting. It's just all repurposing of things, putting them together,
Mm.
taking them apart, painting them, and then that's it. So that's an example of like a really simple project. Something that's more involved or more thought out, I'll start with like a sketch maybe. I'll do some work, some sculpting work on the side to make sure that like before I dive head in, that the technique that I want to do for like, here's an example
Mhm.
of an Amidala figure. I did countless
Oh
different
man,
techniques of
look at
sculpting
that.
to make sure I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to be biting off more than I could chew by trying to sculpt. In the movie, it's this her robe is this loose, flowing,
Can you rotate it like
sheer.
around the face? I'm sorry. Like I want to see around her
Yeah,
head.
yeah.
This is so cool, dude.
Thank you. This is one that's not completely finished actually. So when I had mentioned about incorporating soft goods, I'm going to try to incorporate a soft good on the back, but you can see all the nitty gritty of like the
Yeah.
you know the sculpt that's not finished
What do you
yet.
sculpt out of? Like if you have to make a
Um,
headpiece, let's say.
so this piece is 100% sculpted. The only thing that's not sculpted on this is the hands. They were from like a random Spider-Man figure. Hands are just really hard at this scale unless you're doing like mittens or something.
What
So
material do
this
you use?
It's called Super Sculpty. It's
Super sculpting?
Sculpy, I believe is how it's
Mm-hmm.
spelled. And it comes, and this took me a long time to learn. So like pro tip, it took
Mm-hmm.
some trial and error for me to figure out that there's like Sculpty 1, Sculpty 2, Sculpty 3, Super Sculpty, and each one really has a different purpose. So, and I,
Mm.
I don't have it committed to memory. I can tell by looking at them and feeling them now. But one of them is better for soft goods. Like here's an example of
Interesting.
like you see the delicate like folds at the bottom of the skirt and
Yeah.
how smooth the sculpting is on the body of the dress. That's like the softest clay that you can get, and then you put alcohol on your fingers and smooth it, and it makes like a really smooth
Oh
plastic looking
wow.
finish. Yeah, so and then there's a more durable, thicker, hard, a little bit harder to work with, and that's what I would use for something like this where I'm doing like really intricate fine detail,
Oh man, I love
at
this
the
amidala.
top. Thank
This
you.
was such a striking
Some
design,
soft goods on
especially.
the back here.
Oh man, look at that. Remember that first poster by Rooster Zahn that he did
Yeah.
for episode 1, and you see that striking image like of Princess Amidala looking so regal. I mean, the
Yep.
costume work and like the makeup that went into the
Incredible.
prequels is amazing, amazing
To me,
stuff.
it's the costumes are the star of the show for those movies. You said no sequel or prequel is ever perfect. We
Yeah,
could have a conversation about what we love, and I'm sure an equal conversation about what we don't like about the
right.
prequels. Overall, there, if I had to pick a section of the series of the 9 films, I can't say I enjoy the prequel films the most, but
Hmm.
that's my favorite era of storytelling. I think it's
Mm,
great, and what it builds into obviously is great. So,
yeah.
but to circle back, something like that headpiece, that was something where I would use like a firmer, harder clay because you need
Hmm.
it to cure more durable. And then it's all sealed. I used to boil it, and because you think you can't put the plastic figures in the oven really
Right.
to cook the clay, so I would boil it, and the clay becomes very very fragile when you boil it. So very recently, actually, I've discovered the wonders of like a heat gun. It's like an intense hair dryer basically.
Hmm.
That will cure the clay, and you can really kind of focus the heat on the spots you want, or I
Hmm.
will use like something heavy metal to block the parts that I'm trying not to melt. So it gives you a lot of control, and that really kind of opened up what's possible. Because something like that first pad, or both of those Padme figures that I just showed, like I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was having to boil it, because it would have just been so brittle that the first time you pick it up, it would crumble. So
Okay.
that was a game changer when I realized that these heat guns would work for this type of clay.
So you're already introducing a lot more nuance than I thought about. And I do have hands-on experience because I took a whole bunch of art courses. I have a degree in traditional hand-drawn animation.
Oh, cool.
But before that, I took like clay and pottery and sculpting and like drafting, you name it. Like I went through all of it just to have a hands-on experience. But even I'm like looking at this stuff because so the only thing that I can really show off that I dipped into my experience of like building, and I can't really say
Yeah, I
that
love this.
I built any of it, was basically following what you guys are doing because I understand you and we actually met in one of these groups where people just sculpt these figures, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
I started asking advice from fans like, "Hey guys, I really want a Mara Jade figure to go along with my Luke Skywalker. I got the anniversary edition, the Black Series, and to go with my Thrawn. And unfortunately, there isn't a Mara Jade figure in that scale." And some of the fans told me, if you want the quickest route, just take all the pieces from different figures. This is obviously from Black Series, Black Widow, and so forth. So these are all pre-existing pieces. But I started realizing that a lot of people follow this technique, but sometimes they would take a headpiece, get a 3D model that an artist creates for free. The only
Right.
thing you got to do is give them credit to, and you then 3D print it. Like, have you ever messed with that, like 3D printing and propping it on the pieces that already exist?
Yeah, I haven't. I personally like to kind of keep it all like I think like you had mentioned about being like a traditional hand-drawn animator.
Hmm.
I don't know if maybe I'm being snobby or something, but like my background in fine art makes me want this to be like more of like an art and craft than maybe the hobby actually
Hmm.
describes it as more typically. So I'm kind of anal about like making 100% of
Mm.
what I mean, obviously I'm not making I'm starting with store bought pieces, but I want any of the adjustments and the tweaks that I make to be adjustments and tweaks that I made. Someone very recently, very generously saw the Darth Vader custom that I made recently and offered to send me a 3D printed head for free.
Mhm.
So I think that was such a generous offer. I'll take them up on that, and that'll be my first foray into trying that. Who knows? Maybe it'll open up the floodgates to a whole, my next level of customs. But
Yeah.
that'll be my first foray into 3D printing.
John, can I say that, as a person, as a fan who, thank you so much. Like, you were watching my channel and you joined the Facebook group. Can I say that I'm also a fan of yours?
Well,
After I saw that Darth Vader back to tube figure, dude, my jaws were on the floor. Like, this is not something you see from the Black series or from that series. This is like, I immediately knew this is not a product. It's not something that somebody acquired and put on display. It's handmade, like, and there's such a sense of artistry and ownership, which basically leads me into the next question. And if it's not that figure, I'm going to be disappointed. Could you please tell us all which is one figure you're mostly proud of? And it doesn't have to be a Star Wars figure.
Okay. I mean, it probably would be a Star Wars figure. I'm looking at some that I have in front of me here and trying to figure it out. Okay, so I do have the Vader figure here, which I will show you, but I'll show you this one first. I know you've seen this one before, but this is probably my recent, like, most. I take the most pride in this. Yeah,
I love
this.
This
was. Thank you. It's Jedi Leia from I believe it was an official, like, image that Disney released. I think as a poster in their store that shows Leia. As a young Jedi, which we've never seen in the films before, really. So I was obviously really taken by it when I saw the image and thought, man, I would love to have a figure of that. And, like, obviously I know that when I think, like, I would love to have a figure of that, I could have a figure of it. I can make, so far I've been able to make almost everything that I've ever set out. A couple failures, of course, but I thought, oh man, like, I really need to think about this one. And this is an example of one that would take more time to kind of go to the drawing board. And I would really examine the pieces that I had, because I like to, I find the sculpting fun, but you can really kind of clock when you're looking at it, something that is sculpted versus something that's pieced together from other figures. And ideally, if you can fully use pieces that were made by, like, the Hasbro Black series, then it's going to be cohesive and you're going to put it on your shelf and it'll stand out as special but blend in with the collection. So I just kind of was looking at these pieces that I had, and it all of a sudden just, like, started firing. And I saw, like, oh, I have that cape from a Lord of the Rings figure, that scarf from Jyn Erso, the shawl from the Padme Black series figure. And then I thought, oh, I just need a Leia head. And so I thought, well, lucky. A lot of times you have these ideas and the figures are, they're out of production, or you got to pay $30 for a figure on eBay. Yeah. So I looked on Amazon, and the Leia figure was on sale for $9.99. So I bought 7 of them and went to my collection and ripped the head off of the Leia that was in my display case, and it all came together to be this Jedi.
If I were to buy one figure, I'm so tempted to just say, like, sir, when we finish this podcast, what's the deal here? Like, how much a figure like this costs to commission? It's just, and it's funny because you and I are both, we have connected to that specific art piece, because I did a Facebook post that I'm trying to basically ask the fans to basically go to, change.org and try to bring Kevin J. Anderson's series of Young Jedi Knights series back. It's a legend series of 14 books, super epic, whatever. It's not part of the conversation. But I used that specific Leia's image, and, when I just put it in there, I'm like, that's it. That's all it needs. Because, when you're creating a post on Facebook to draw attention, 99% of the people who watch it, they're kind of like, if I can say, micro cynics. They're like, whatever. These change.org petitions, they don't work, whatever. You want to catch the eye, right? You want something that's pretty and attractive, and you got to play on people's emotions. I know there's tons of Leia fans and tons of Carrie Fisher fans. The moment I put in there, it was like one of the most successful, posts that I made because of their artwork.
That's awesome. It was just a stunning image, and it's been the background on my phone since the first time I saw it. It was for the first time since my niece was born. I have a picture that's not her on the background on my phone, because it was just beautiful. And now I will say, I've never sold a figure, never. Yeah. I wouldn't even begin to know what to value them at. I look at what other people's things are selling for, and anything that I can find that might be comparable. I look at the price tag and think, I'm not trying to be greedy, but it takes so much time that even to just, reimburse myself the parts plus something for time, it gets kind of, to a spot where the the value it would just be too high, I think, for me to feel
Yeah.
comfortable asking anybody to pay it. But I have been recently, because I've had a very positive reaction to this Vader and to that Leia figure that I just showed. I've been starting to keep an eye out for like the parts, so that if I see Leia go on sale for $9.99 again, I'll get a couple. If I see it, Jenny Erso is probably the least popular Black Series figure ever.
Yeah.
But they keep popping up on eBay for $2, $3, $4, but they never have the headscarf. It's just the figure. So I am keeping an eye out to see how I might be able to not, like mass produce, obviously, but maybe make 3 or 4 more
Yeah.
of that Leia. So you'll be at the top of my list if that ever happens.
All right, I'll take your word for it. It's when I was doing selling the video games in a comic book shop, we had this real hobby after PlayStation released that portable PlayStation Portable. Basically, it was the name of it,
Yeah.
the first handheld console they made. And years after it was kind of like out of production, that's when people started tinkering with it, modding it, and putting like retro games on it and stuff like this. One of my friends was so good at it, and I was also so good that, he approached me one day and I asked him, hey, like, John, why don't you start selling that? Because there is a demand for it. People want their custom modded, decked out PlayStations. And he's
Sure.
like, no, that's something that's reserved as a hobby. If I start selling it and people start coming to me with like commissions or put this, put that, I will stop enjoying it. There's 2 different avenues that people go. For you, it could be like the Zen moment where you come into your house, right, away from family, friends. Everybody needs that alone moment.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right? And you sit down and like you enjoy that, and selling it would kind of like tarnish the experience of it. While other people like, hey, like if that's a side avenue for me, if let's say like I have a steady gig over here, like for me, my professional career has been very unstable, especially now with COVID. I've been in and out of work, freelancing. I'm trying to pick up jobs, on the internet. Actually, my YouTube channel was part of me not falling into depression and saying, I got to project my creativity somehow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And
I could totally found that in quarantine, right?
Yeah. And like I could totally see a scenario where for somebody like you who say like, hey, I have this little, Darth Vader I've worked for X amount of weeks, perhaps for a month and a half, can push it for like $1,100, $2,000 easy. Why not?
Right.
Speaking of, could you please show us that dope,
I can show you the Vader.
Amazing Vader figure.
Ready?
Oh,
here we go. I don't know if it's gonna maybe hard to get a good view of it here and light it up.
Yeah. I'll
incorporated the remote.
Oh, you have the
incorporated the remote like right into the display. So the remote is attached to the back here.
Look at that, man. So if there's bulbs and lights inside, I assume you never tried to fill it up with any kind of liquid to give it more like realism?
Right, I didn't. So I'm toying with the idea. I bought a couple of these. It's a glass vase that I found at a thrift store, and I bought a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I put there. So there's like a little flaw in the glass that you can't. I'm sure you'll be able to see it on camera, but it looks like a bubble.
Mm-hmm.
So I took one of the extra ones, and I thought like it kind of it's silly. It looked like when you're driving and a rock like kicks up off the road and cracks your windshield.
Yeah,
that's what the flaw looks like. So I took it to my driveway and stood about 15 feet away from it and threw handfuls of gravel at it.
That's
awesome. It kind of worked, but now I'm afraid to like break it or mess it up, because it put little chips in the glass, but I'm afraid if it's not just right, then I'll be back to the drawing board. But it's got so the lid comes off. There's like all these little pieces.
That's fantastic, man. Look at
that are removable, so that the actual lid can come off. So I figured I'm gonna have to get in there to replace the batteries at some point.
Man, look at and I mean the official artwork that was leaked, right, for the Kenobi series that has the same kind of like concept. How do they coincide? Like you have your figure first, and then the artwork comes out days after.
Kind of. So I've been planning this figure. So little backstory, I guess. I've only ever worked with female customizing figures, because it was the parts that I had. I was for a long time just to keep like the collecting at bay at like at a spot where I'll be able to display it all and not spend all my money and fill my house with toys. I only collected Princess Leia. And then I branched out and I had this idea. This was a quarantine hobby that I wanted to get every single Padme or Queen Amidala costume, because I'm obsessed with the costumes you'd mentioned before, and like especially you'd mentioned that like delicate Asian doll, and the costumes are obviously inspired by Kabuki and Japanese culture. So I just thought they're beautiful from a costume perspective. I got on my desk here my book that's Star Wars costumes. It's a passion of mine. I love to flip through this book and look at
Hmm.
designs on the internet and go to that traveling exhibit when it's here. I saw it like 3 times. So I wanted to get every Padme figure that I could that was available. So I took to eBay and slowly
Hmm.
filled the whole shelf. And then I thought, okay, well, I've branched out to that. Now I might need like this is how it happens. I have a full collection now. It's not just Leia or just Padme. Every time I make a custom, I figure like, oh, I need like a figure or two to put around it. So when I
Yeah.
made the Kira from Solo, I bought Solo and Lando and Dryden Voss, and so now I've got a little Solo shelf. So that's how it happened. So with the Vader figure specifically, um, had been thinking of veering away from like the female customs just to mix it up a little bit. And I
Hmm.
made the Luke that you had mentioned from the original one sheet. I actually have altered it a little bit. It's not painted yet. I changed
Hmm.
the sculpt on his jacket a little bit, but that was my first male custom, and it went pretty well. It's not my favorite piece, but it turned out
Hmm.
okay. So I thought, all right, I tested the waters, and I can do that. So then I thought I've always wanted Vader in this Bacta tank, and it just seemed way too ambitious. But I started thinking about it and thought, well, like it doesn't matter if it takes me a day, a week, a month. It's a hobby. I can let it sit
Right.
and think about it. So I started buying shirtless figures. I thought if the less I can sculpt, the more realistic it will look. So I
Yeah.
started searching for and buying shirtless figures. Weird Google searches, but so I found the perfect figure, and it sat on
Right.
my shelf for a while. And I started sketching and looking at images, and had even started kind of like I cut his arms off and cut his legs off,
Hmm.
and sculpted his legs, and it was just kind of this weird little hunk of a figure. And then the images leaked from Solo, and I thought like I had up to that point been using reference from the comic books and reference from Rogue One. And when the Solo images leaked, or not Solo, I'm sorry, Kenobi, when those images leaked, I thought, well, this is like it just clicked. It was what I was missing to, the
Hmm.
harnesses and all the different ports for the tubes. And that's when I took to the figure. So here you can see out of the glass.
Yeah. Dude, it is so detailed, and it's like it. What's also interesting. Sometimes it's the detail that sells it, but sometimes it's just the direction. You could have an art piece, not necessarily sculpture, that is not too detailed, but it carries the character, the spirit of what you're trying to portray effortlessly. And that comes from the great artist, almost a minimalist approach. Sometimes you can
Right.
saturate it with detail and it doesn't work. Sometimes it can be very simple couple of things. That's like just those dark tubes that you chose, color-wise. I'm like, yeah, I could believe this is half machine, half man. The
Right.
cybernetic aspect of Vader really comes strong in that piece.
There's some details that it's really hard to photograph. I've been trying, but I used a lot of actual, and this is kind of new for me. I usually try to keep my supplies from figures when I'm building figures from
Hmm.
figures. If I'm looking for a cape for Leia, I found a cape from a Lord of the Rings figure instead of trying to make something out of fabric or sculpt something because I want it to look cohesive. So this broke all my rules, and maybe is why it turned out as decent as it did. But
Hmm.
I don't know if you can see, but there's actual like wires coming out of
Yeah, I
his
saw that.
body.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it showed in
So
the
that
picture on the Facebook when you posted the images. Remember, like, hey man, post the pictures. You could tell they're like real wires, like very that tangible feel. You could almost like touch the figure, touch the person, and be like, yeah, this is Anakin.
Yeah, I wanted that. That was because it was such a dark, really. It's kind of a grotesque figure. When we
Yeah.
talk about McFarlane, it's more in line with that than anything Hasbro's ever done, because it is very, adult. And I don't like to, I guess, waste my time, for lack of a better word, with things that I think Hasbro are going to make. So I've been wanting like a Jedi Leia from that
Hmm.
flashback from Episode 9, but I know it's forthcoming, so I'm not going to spend the money and the time.
Yeah.
And I just thought with Kenobi coming out, like, is it ever possible that Hasbro is ever going to make this figure? And I took the chances because I figured it's so dark and so adult, and the imagery is it's pretty
Hmm.
shocking to sell as a toy. So I
Yeah.
thought I was kind of safe to spend the time because it did take a long time, but
Yeah.
I enjoyed every second of
No,
it.
the results is there, man. I think I'm pretty sure
Thank
you've
you.
got nothing but positive response. I want to
Yeah,
lead
it's been
into my
overwhelming.
I want to lead into my next question by actually like looking at this piece of Vader. I personally see your next project possibly Weapon X Wolverine because they're like so thematically similar. A human being, right? This biology attached to machinery that tries to
Right.
break free and it is fueled by rage. So thematically, very, very simple. How do you go about selecting your next passion project?
I kind of it's one of two things. Either I have a list that I kind of work from. I keep a note at my desk, and like while
Hmm.
I'm working throughout the day, if I've got a YouTube video on in the background and I see an alien that's really cool, I'll pause it and be like, oh, take a minute to like Wikipedia and figure out what that alien is, and
Hmm.
just add it to a list of things that I found visually interesting. Got a list in my head always, and then there's the also just the things that just kind of strike me. So I'll go when I'm in a creative mood. I'll go to that list and think like, what do I have the parts for in the house, and then just make that. When I'm feeling like, that's when I want to keep my hands busy and be creative. When I'm really wanting to do something like Vader, for example, I conceptualize for a long time. I draw lots of pictures. I watch everything I can find on YouTube. I look at every image I can find on Google, and that's when I start to draw. So I can combine what I'm seeing in my head from YouTube and from Google searching to start to figure out what I want the figure to look like. And then I go to the internet and try to find pieces that match what I want it to look like, and then
Yeah.
get as close as possible. And maybe, like my initial concept for this Vader was from Rogue One, where he has his arms, kind of out
Right.
like this,
Right. Right.
and he's a little bit more, the tank is a little bit more like fishbowl, and he's kind of floating,
Hmm.
and I just couldn't find the pieces for it. So you find the piece with the more static position, and that's when I decided to do the more Kenobi look, where he's hanging from the
Hmm.
harnesses. So the idea starts, and then the creativity comes in with figuring exactly what I want it to look like, and then compromising with the pieces that are available and with what I can sculpt within my sculpting is probably my weakest ability within this whole hobby. So what I can sculpt, which won't ruin the look of the piece or the natural flow of the piece, and then that just the figure kind of comes together naturally from those elements.
Hmm. So you basically described to me the whole process of an artist. I have a very, very good friend, Ryan Irish, who moved to Texas a couple of years ago here from New York City, but he has a compulsion where he needs to create. He creates this like three-dimensional paintings and traditional paintings and stuff like that, and he's just amazing. And it's something that I've never observed in myself, because if I ever were to call myself an artist, and I never do, I'm more of a designer, because I
Okay,
like putting things together that to communicate something. But to create something from scratch demands so much focus and intent and just a compulsion. You need to do it. That I'm like, that's a lifestyle you have to live, and that's what I'm
sure.
basically seeing in you. This is more than just like little passion project. You're an artist, basically.
It's something that lets me combine a lot of the things that I love with I guess like a natural talent or an ability to do it. So
Yeah.
I would, for a long time, I just would draw. I would just draw and draw and draw and draw and draw. And I never really drew anything that was that original. I was looking at things and drawing them, looking at
Hmm.
characters and drawing them. And that just kind of segued into this. I think the tactile, the being able to do it with, not just to be limited to a sheet of paper and a pencil or a tablet and a pen, but to actually be able to cut and sculpt and glue, and I use a Dremel tool. This is actually very recent for me. I try to push myself so that I don't get kind of stale or sick of it, and to really expand what I'm also able to do. So, like if I would have seen something like this Vader 2 or 3 years ago, I would have thought that's cool. I can never make that. I'm glad somebody did. I could never do it. But now I always am trying to incorporate new tools and new techniques. Recently, I've started obsessing over like keeping articulation. So I used to
Hmm.
just sculpt over joints and super
Hmm.
glue them into the poses that I wanted. So it's obviously easier to get a nice looking figure, but
Hmm.
then it becomes a statue, and you lose the, not that I sit and play with them, but when you're arranging your shelf, and maybe the pose that you think you're going to want it in when you're making it doesn't work with the actual display that you're putting together when you're displaying it. So I've been obsessively trying to figure out how to either retain or create articulation through like little tiny screws and a Dremel tool that will set the threads in the plastic. And I feel like that's really kind of expanded the things I'm able to do, because it's not just anymore, do these pieces fit together? It's how do I make them fit together and retain the articulation?
Yeah. John, I want to stop wrapping up with a
Excuse me.
couple of bonus questions, but I definitely want to say thank you for spending the evening to sit down and talk with me. It's
Absolutely.
when I don't think it will ever matter whether I'll have like 1,500 YouTube watchers or 25,000 a couple of years from now, which I tend to do. I basically threw all my creativity into it. But regardless of that, I think it's the utter joy to be able to just talk to another person. You don't have to be another celebrity, YouTuber, influencer, this or that. just another fan, man. Like two people sit
Absolutely.
down, right? Come from two different worlds, backgrounds, and kind of like arrive at this Star Wars universe from completely different trajectories. It's like, hey, it's a commonality. It's something that could sit down and enjoy. And it's been absolute pleasure
Likewise.
talking to you,
Thank
man.
you.
And if for any reason, for whatever, if I could pull you in here a couple of more times, I'd be more than grateful
Happy
to
to,
have you
yeah,
on.
happy to come back for sure. I appreciate the opportunity. You're right. It's very nice to be able to talk to somebody about things that you love, right? And
Right.
when you talk about Star Wars specifically, and in your page really specifically, I love your page because I found it. I don't
Thank
even
you.
remember, to be honest, I don't remember how I found it. I probably saw something shared to it, or um, it was around the time that I created that Leia, Jedi Leia,
Hmm.
and I love your page. It's like this is gonna sound cheesy to say, but to me, it feels like a very safe space, especially when you're in the fandom and it. Not to like throw buzzwords into the conversation, but it can be a little toxic sometimes. And for somebody who's a little
Yeah.
bit left of center to the traditional fanboy,
Hmm.
it was getting a lot. It was becoming a lot. I was getting kind of turned off on the fandom, and you can never take the movies away, you can never take the collecting away,
Yeah.
but you can take the discourse away, which is a big part of what I enjoy is the community
Yeah.
aspect of, whether you're in Russia or China or America, you all have seen Star Wars and we all know about the Force, and it's a common thread between fans, and I was getting pretty bummed out by
Yeah.
and the things that I love about the movies were things that people were kind of tearing apart. And I thought, well, maybe this fandom is not for me anymore. And then I found your
Hmm.
group and thought, well, no, here it is. Like, here's my corner of the galaxy, and I love your page. So
Thank you.
I hope that it grows and flourishes and gets the attention that it deserves.
That's the biggest compliment because it started, the Facebook part of it started really for me to just dump my videos.
Okay,
Like, is anybody gonna ever see them? I don't know. But I'm the kind of guy who's like, I throw myself in the fire. I don't think about a lot. Will it succeed or not? You make it succeed. It's
yeah,
you, how much it's a grind. You put work into it, and sooner or later things that just start firing back. That's the way things work, or at least in
yeah.
my
You get what you give, right?
exactly. It's in my 40 years experience of living here on this planet is what you give is what you get. And when I started like having people come on the page and start checking stuff out, I'm like, hold on a second. So let's organize a little bit here.
Yeah,
And the only thing I want to communicate to people is that it's not about me, it's about us. Can't we create an environment where all of us come together? You as a
sure.
hobbyist who is a modeler, me who enjoys Star Wars comic, a 16-year-old who cherishes everything about the sequels because they're godly movies to him. Who the heck cares? Can we come in and have a discourse without going that the Kathleen Kennedy and Disney conspiracy and who's
Right.
going to like can
Yeah.
we please be adults? And unfortunately, not everybody understands that. I had this guy last week. He's like, "Oh, is this a real Facebook group or you're just dumping your videos here?" I'm like, "Well, obviously, I am dumping my videos here because I started this
Right.
group so I could just throw
For
my
to post
YouTube."
your videos. Yeah.
Right, but it's like it's for everyone. Like, and you just don't get it. Why does an adult have to act like a kid? With a little bit of socialist ideas that I have that I put into this group, where like it's not 100% about free speech. It's about saying whatever the heck you want, but the way that you speak is going to be filtered a little bit. Let's see if that
Sure.
experiment, crashes and burns, or if it's fruitful. And people enjoy it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Hopefully.
on with my bonus questions, if I may.
Sure.
What advice would you give to beginner modelers?
I would honestly don't take yourself too seriously and like don't be
Hmm.
afraid to fail. I have currently I have this bin that's currently empty, which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but usually it's a bin of failed projects.
Hmm.
And like my the Padme that I showed in the Theed gown, for example, I bet I false started on that figure like 4 or 5 times, and
Oh.
I was struggling to figure out how to best sculpt the dress. Do I want it to be more in line with being screen accurate, or am I trying to make more of a sculptural, impressive, kind of grand, representing the grand royalty of the character? So I just had a couple really really pathetic false starts, and one that I was almost done with that I thought was turning out very nicely, and then I just completely ruined it with the paint, and it was
Hmm.
just unsalvageable. So I had this bin of pieces that I wouldn't throw away until I finished that figure. And to answer your question, where I'm going with that is like, don't be afraid to mess up, because
Hmm.
every single figure that I've made, I've learned from, and that's why I keep the failures, so that when I decide to that I'm ready to go back and try it again, I'm not going to repeat my mistakes. I'm not going to let myself get so frustrated that I fall into the traps that I fell in the failed pieces. So really the biggest more like piece of advice is to just not give up, and to just really don't take yourself too seriously.
Mhm.
Failing is part of what gets you to where you're trying to be.
I quickly want to add exactly what Tiwi are saying to kind of like add on to your awesome advice is that I also imagine myself in this very new digital space and social media platform. And I can only imagine myself as a young teenager trying to interact with people through that and how
Sure.
much communication matters and especially negativity can affect your hobby or something that you're enjoying. Guys, once again, if you're like a new creative person who wants feedback and hear from people, like let's say you're doing a Star Wars drawing or a sculpture here, you have to be brave and you have to understand that not everybody's going to like your work, but it's
Absolutely.
okay. It is fine. It makes you only a stronger person and a better artist if you hear criticism, even if you hear a couple of bad, vile words from people who are not sensitive, who are not smart, and they're just saying things to make you sad or make you angry. Just
Right.
disregard them, because majority
Absolutely.
of people, majority of Star Wars fans that have come across are kind people, and they will look at your stuff and they'll either give you a critique and say like, hey, I think this or that could be better, or they will encourage you and say, hey man, you're doing awesome, please continue. So anybody who's watching this podcast, 12 people or 25,000, I want to add to what you're saying is just be brave and just do it today. Don't wait for tomorrow. Don't wait for a month when you're going to get better. Just do it today, throw it
Yep.
out there, and have
No better
people
time
talk
than
about it.
today.
Yep,
I
exactly.
saw a thing on a different Facebook Star Wars fan page. It might have even been like the official, like Star Wars Facebook
Mm-hmm.
page, where this young boy, I'm not sure where in the world he was from, he posted a picture of himself next to a picture of Ezra Bridger
Yeah.
and said, please share this photo. It's my dream to play Ezra, and I know that they're casting him right now in live action, and I want to get this in front of as many people as I can. And the first 4 or 5 comments on this post were so rude, and not just like, oh, like, like not be
Mm-hmm.
more realistic or even
Mm-hmm.
constructive criticism, just nasty, comments on his appearance. And I got so mad. I got so angry that I just
Yeah.
started typing this long message about this is not what the culture is about, and we should support each other, and
Exactly.
the spirit of the movie is hope, and how dare you. And then before I posted this long message, I started reading the rest of the comments, and they were so overwhelmingly positive, and
Mm-hmm.
people saying, like, follow your dreams or try to
Mm-hmm.
act in local theater to get some experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, I deleted everything I was going to say and just said, like, follow your dreams, because
Yeah.
it was and to just to bring it around to what you were saying, there's always going to be somebody that tries to take you down for whatever reason, rather they're just
Yeah.
a jerk that gets, that's how they get their joy, or if they, are jealous of you or
Yeah.
whatever.
It's
There's
hurt
always going to
people.
be that
Yeah.
person. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
It's
you have to
people
remember
who are
that.
like something is missing in their life and they try to project on others. And I'm pretty sure
Absolutely.
90% of the time they don't even mean it, because when I start interacting with harsher commentaries on my YouTube, people come around. It's like, oh, I didn't mean it like that. When they start understanding that through this formless media, you
Right.
put a little bit of character and face. And that's the reason I'm doing this podcast with you, where you see a face, you hear a voice, you hear dreams and feelings and passions in life. When people come through, you're not as quickly to be like nasty to people. You're like, oh,
Yeah,
hold on a
less
second, that's another
judgmental.
person. Exactly.
Yeah, the internet puts a weird. The internet's great because it connects. I never would have met you if it wasn't for the internet. It connects
Yeah.
like-minded people with
Mm-hmm.
interesting, the same interests and hobbies. But it also kind of becomes a filter to where you kind of sometimes forget that you're talking to or commenting on something that's done by a real person, and it's not just an image on a Google search. Or when you're
Yeah.
interacting with someone on social media, you often forget that it's a person at the other end of that, and it's important to remember. Not that everybody needs to have kid gloves on or be too
Yeah.
sensitive, but it's
Yeah.
just very important to me to remember that you're talking to real people. It's
Yeah.
easy to forget that
I'm into
sometimes.
that. Yeah, definitely. And my last bonus question, and if after that you do have any questions for me, I will be more than happy to answer them. Because I don't have kids yet either. I'm all to myself. Is
Same.
which which is your favorite Star Wars trilogy and your favorite Star Wars film?
Oh man, so my favorite trilogy, I'm gonna have to go with the original trilogy if we're just talking about the actual movies themselves. My favorite
Yeah.
era is probably like like prequel, Clone Wars, Rebels, that kind of leading up to the original trilogy. But if we're just talking about films, it's absolutely the original trilogy. If I have to pick one movie, I'm probably going to go Rogue and maybe say The Last Jedi. It's maybe too fresh to say that it's my absolute favorite, but as far as enjoyment as an adult, filmmaking craft, the beats of the story. If you remove Canto Bright from that movie, it's a perfect Star Wars movie. So I'm going to say that it's probably currently my favorite. In the past, before that movie, I would have probably said Return of the Jedi. I'm into more of the adventure kind of elements
Yeah.
of the series. So I would say Return of the Jedi if we're talking favorite films from the original trilogy.
Yeah, mine would be, of course, the original trilogy. And for a very, very long time, it was very difficult for me to separate the three films because I saw them as one thing, and they always were as one big movie, one big story to me. I couldn't say which one was better, And then, of course, I go to film school, I study animation, and people break them apart and say, how the Empire Strikes Back is considered one of the greatest American adventure films, and blah blah blah. And I was kind of like on board with that for a little while, but then I realized and came back to, and always will come back to, I think, Episode 4: A New Hope, because it is cinematically the most immaculate of all Star Wars films.
The editing in that movie is there's not a single, there's no fat to trim. It's perfect.
And the way that it flows and how you meet the hero, when you meet him, from shot to shot, from scene to scene, that seemingly rushed and snowballing disaster of a film, right? When you look at the history and the making of it, gets to this point, it's miraculous because
it is.
The actor directing could have been a little bit tighter, the dialogues could have been a little bit tighter, but on the grander canvas of things, it is the most immaculate Star Wars film. I even argue the point that if you roll the credits and you never see or show any other Star Wars film ever again, outside of the screen, you get all the package. You get fight continues, and the rebels will win the Empire because they have already won this devastating weapon.
Right. Oh yeah, it's such a tight standalone movie, and I think that at the time they're making the movie, they didn't know, nothing was certain. They had to make a standalone tight movie, and they just hit the ball out of the park. People that complain about episode 7 being so similar to episode 4. And when you really start to break it down from a sci-fi and an action and adventure standpoint, like what action, adventure, sci-fi movie after A New Hope doesn't follow that format? It's like it's not reinventing the wheel. The wheel has already been invented, and it's just it's like every romance is Romeo and Juliet. Every sci-fi action adventure movie is A New Hope because it's perfect. Like it's the template now.
Yeah, John, if you have any last thoughts, please mention them, and please tell fans, or once again, if you do have any kind of like Instagram or YouTube or any kind of outlet where people can come and check your art out, please do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again for having me. This has been really, really fun and, a unique opportunity to be able to talk about this hobby that I love to somebody who is interested and who understands the characters and the passion. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure, and I'd love to come back sometime. I don't, unfortunately, have any platform. I use Facebook, a group called Star Wars Customs, to post, and that's the majority of it. I am working on making my own Facebook and my own Instagram. I'm just kind of toying with like the the exact right name. So if you have any ideas, let me know, because it's been hard to find something that makes sense, something that I like, and something that isn't already used. So as soon as I kind of nail that down, I'll start. I have a visitor.
Introduce us.
This is Rose, my cat, Rose. Gypsy Rose Lee. Yeah, my one and only housemate.
I had cats all my life in Russia. I love cats.
Yeah.
I love dogs, don't get me wrong. I had a German Shepherd, but cats are my thing. I'm surprised she doesn't have a Star Wars name.
I am too. So she's named Gypsy Rose Lee after this stripper from like a really old musical that my mom loved when she was a little girl. Random story. It's called Gypsy Rose Lee. So she's named after that. When I say media and entertainment and film has been like a part of my life, it was from childhood forward. So other than that, I do appreciate the time and your time and the opportunity, and I'd love to come back whenever you'll have me.
Yeah, guys, we're wrapping things up here. Thanks so much for staying with us and checking out a conversation with John and with his passion of making these awesome Star Wars models and figures and stuff like that. once again, thanks so much for watching, supporting the channel. Please leave a comments down below in the video section. Let us know how you enjoyed it. Tell us if you want to jump into figure, modeling. Maybe we can drop a couple of links and show you a couple of Star Wars groups on Facebook where you can begin your journey and start checking all this stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care, everyone.